if we have Dot on standby, don't we, to chair if you go out.
We're now live, Chair.
Good. Welcome, members. Well, that was very stressful getting in. Lots of people around, past thousands. Welcome to this meeting of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Board, Wednesday the 16th of February. Agenda. Substitutes nominated for this meeting. Apologies for absence.
Yes, apologies from Councillor Courtney, and substituting we have Councillor Kingston.
Welcome, welcome. Item 2, members' interests. I need to remind members of the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests or other interests they might have in relation to items included on this agenda. Are there any? Have I gone blank again?
No.
Nobody.
So there are none. Have to speak. Admission of the public is not recommended the public be excluded. In fact, we are live on YouTube. For non-members of the council who aren't familiar with this, usually we are public, but nobody ever comes. But YouTube makes it accessible to everybody. So whatever you say in these meetings is forever enshrined on YouTube. And should you ever want to watch it, you can do. I've just got a new telly, I can watch it on my telly. Anyway, minutes of the meeting, 19th of January. Comments, members? I have one. Page 9, the bottom of. How many young advisors in the Crowther Safeguarding Children's Partnership were children who were looked after? Officers said they were going to send me down of this information. I don't ever seem to have received it. Have I?
I don't think by the sound of it that Julia Caldwell has sent it to you, Chair, but I did speak to her about this and she was checking how many were, and I think your specific question were how many children in the young advisors were looked after. As far as Julia's identified so far, there are none, but she is going to find out some more details in respect to the different backgrounds of the young people, and I'll make sure she gets you a briefing note.
Okay, I'll have to put it down, including children who were looked after.
Yes. Yes, Chair. Yeah, I'll make sure I follow it up with her. I have asked her about it a couple of times. Make sure you get a briefing note on it.
All right, thanks. Lauren's very kindly put in the chat. Can she just remind members to use the chat or raise the hand function if they have a question? Much better than item 5. Crowther School Results Academic Year 2021. Now I have a guest list here of people, which is very exciting. Although I'm always a little nervous in rooms full of head teachers. My experience of meeting head teachers personally was not always a happy one, shall we say. I'm sure it won't be the same tonight. Leslie, you were in this.
Yes, Chair, thank you for that. And we are joined by a number of our head teachers this evening. We were due to be joined by some more, but one of our schools has currently got Ofsted in. So Tony Guys has had to send his apologies. But I can see in the room we've got Nick Robinson and Sarah Case, who are from Trinity Academy Halifax, Karen Smith, who's from St Andrews Infant and Junior School. She's executive head across both, and Helen Crowther here from Greetland Academy, and we are due to be joined by Helen York, but I can't see her at the moment. Helen is the head at Withenfields School as well. So I'm really grateful that they could join us, and I think they're the ones that you really need to hear most from this evening. You've had sight of the report, so I don't propose to go through that, but I do want to just start by saying how incredibly proud we are as a local authority of our schools and our settings during the past 2 years. They've dealt with an unprecedented period. The challenges have been relentless, and I have to say they continue to be so. I know, talking to head teachers, that they live with their phones in their hand and can go from being all ready to go for a normal day in school to within seconds then having to rethink their plans for the day completely and deal with quite significant staffing absences. And that's still the reality, although case rates are improving. I think that it's really important to recognise that despite those pressures, our schools have continued to be focused on the quality of education for their children and on continued school improvement. It has been really difficult at times for some of our schools to continue that focus. Every school is in different circumstances and has had to deal with different challenges at different times, but there has been that continued focus. And we have our self-improving school model in Calderdale, which is where the bulk of our funded school improvement work takes place, is through our cluster system. And all our schools, including academies and maintained schools, are part of a cluster. Those clusters receive funding to enable them to meet the priorities within their cluster that are linked to the local authority priorities too. And also have a funded cluster officer to coordinate that work, which is really important. They're accountable to the Calderdale Partnership School Improvement Board, and that board also has additional funds then to provide for bids for schools or groups of schools or clusters where they want to do some further work to tackle priorities or to respond to particular challenges. So that sort of sets the background to it. The report sets out the outcomes for the last academic year, and obviously those were very limited in terms of published data. There are strengths and some areas for improvement within the report that you'll clearly recognise through that. Some of the challenges that we still face are our outcomes in terms of Ofsted judgments. We went into the pandemic with our primary schools being below the national rate of schools being good or better. It's fair to say we had a number of schools at that point who were really ready for inspection, but who we expected to improve their judgment. One of those was Witham Fields, and I'd hope that Helen York would be here to talk about her experience tonight. But Karen Smith and Helen Crowther have both been through inspections recently and can talk about that. And that then inspections were paused at the start of the pandemic. So our schools were ready. They'd done a lot of work to address the issues from the previous inspections and then didn't have the chance to demonstrate that before they had to face additional challenges. But they've maintained that work, and Witham Fields was one that moved from requires improvement to good despite those challenges. So some really good work going on there. But the challenges remain that because inspections were paused, we still haven't had a huge number, and schools have faced those additional pressures. So I think one of the challenges that we face now is some unknown quantities around inspection. We have a very small school effectiveness service with 2.2 full-time equivalent officers for all our schools. And we normally allocate their work using a risk assessment process. And that's usually based quite extensively on the data, which we haven't obviously had now for 2 years. So we've used other means of working with our schools to risk assess, but it means that we don't get into every school all the time. And so the cluster work is really important in making sure we address issues, but there are some unknowns for us still that we need to work really closely to address now. We're working with our regional colleagues. We're leading on some work with the West Yorkshire authorities to join up and look at our school improvement work, to learn from each other's activities and to see what more we can be doing. Some of the other challenges we face are around some aspects of attendance. We have some real strengths there, but some of our persistent absence at secondary school is higher than national. That I feel is clearly linked to the COVID situation. We've had higher case rates in Calderdale than has been seen in most authorities, and that's had an impact on attendance. We've also seen a rise in exclusions, particularly suspensions in the primary phase. You'll see the figures there increased last year. And we're doing a lot of work following on from our Wicked Issues Forum to really look at how we can ensure we're really inclusive and we've got the right support for our schools and our children and young people at the right time, to make sure we've got early identification of any extra need, whether that's family need that impacts on children or special educational needs. So there's a lot of work going on in that area, but still some challenges remain for us there. Some of the strengths, just to finish on there, you'll see that the two sets of published attainment outcomes that are included in the report, phonics in Key Stage 1 and the Key Stage 4 outcomes, are both above national, which is real testament to the work that's gone on in our schools. Again, I think one of the key things to note there is that all our groups are above national as well. So our disadvantaged children are doing better than disadvantaged children nationally. Where we have gaps, that's because all groups are performing really well. So we haven't closed the gaps yet for our disadvantaged children. And again, that's very much part of our education recovery plan. So we've got a range of activities going on. It's the activities now, the actions now to address those areas of challenge and the priorities within the authority that are really key. And our education recovery plan is a system-wide response, working with key partners right across all our key stakeholders to co-produce that plan. It's not all new work, it's bringing work together from different agencies, different services, but making sure that we've got a really robust joined up response that makes the best use of the resources that we've got available. So I'll pause there because I think you'll really want to hear from our colleagues here from schools this evening.
Yeah, I think thanks for that, Leslie. I'd like to echo comments about the hard work that's been going on during the pandemic. I would like to hear from each of the headmasters. I'm sure we would, from their perspective, but throughout this, before you actually dig down into the results, the thing that came out of me was the whole report, if the head teachers could concentrate on where the priorities for improvement do they see. We are where we are, aren't we? The priorities for improvement are mentioned 2 or 3 times in this report. If that's a way we could look forward, does that make sense?
Do you want me to bring the heads in?
Yeah, before we go into members' questions, I'd like to hear from them. I think that'd be the best way. Then we'll go to members' questions because they're piling up on members' questions.
Okay. I'll come to Nick and Sarah first from Trinity Academy Halifax, our secondary school, obviously an academy. So I'll hand over to you if you want to just feedback to members.
Yeah, and I hope members don't mind if I share. We just put a few slides together just to talk through a few things. Thought it might be useful. We can share them after. Oh, don't worry, it won't become a slide fest, as can be the case. Can members see that?
Yes, thanks, Nick. Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing.
So what I thought we'd do is just quickly go through 3 areas, and we'll hopefully cover everything that members want to hear about. We thought we'd just very quickly start talking about how we worked last year, because that ties into where our priorities have been this year and some of the challenges we've had this year. We'll talk around student support, again, what was offered and what we're sort of working on at the moment, and then also how we've gained and used external support from Calderdale and other areas, and also how we've quality assured the work that we're doing. Really quick, I'll share it, so you don't need to read it to you. One of the things I think is important is the way that we went about making sure our students got the grades they deserved last year, and were able to access the next step in their education. And that was through the teacher assessed grades process. We made sure that we were very open with students around what this looked like, how we were going to assess them, which was 3 times from when they returned in March before the end. We were clear with parents how that would be done. We made sure that when we did it, it was done as fairly as possible. So we explained to students what the assessments would be on, aware that there'd been gaps over the 18 months previously due to COVID. And then we gave parents and students clear understanding of what would be assessed, when the assessments would be. And then we made sure that those assessments were robustly standardised and moderated to make sure that the grades students were awarded were in line with the grades that had been awarded to students from Trinity Academy Halifax in the past, so that we were confident that the students were getting the grades they deserved. And actually, that works 2 ways, because I think you'll all have heard of sort of grade inflation and things like that. Well, we wanted to make grade inflation's fine if you get really good grades and you get to go and do something, but if you're not then able to properly access that next step, it's not the right thing, because then you feel like you're unable to access it. So we wanted to make sure that students got the right grades, were able to access the right courses. So the grades that we allocated were in line with Trinity Academy Halifax's 3-year trend. As I mentioned earlier, we were clear with students, we were clear with parents around what the process would be. And we had in place, in line with guidance, robust processes for appeals. All appeals, of which there was one, was successfully resolved in terms of students understood the process, they understood why they got the grades they got, parents did. One appeal, which was reasonable, and it was resolved. Here's some of the sort of literature. Again, if people wanted to get copies of it, to have a look at how we did it, they can do. But I just wanted to sort of emphasise the robust nature of it. And then, as you can see there, the outcomes for Trinity Academy Halifax. What you'll see there, the Progress 8 scores are broadly in line over the last 4 years. I've put up there just to show, again, in terms of attainment, how students did across 8 subjects, broadly in line. You can see above national, but that tends to be what Trinity Academy Halifax students get. 4 basics, so in English and maths, again, broadly in line, same for the 5 basics. So we were confident at the end of that process that the year 11 students were able to go and access the courses successfully that they wanted to, whether that was sixth form, college, apprenticeship, or employment. A couple of things worth mentioning that came out of COVID and the work we did. Remote education was a real key feature of sort of the COVID era. In that time, we developed things that we feel are beneficial now, and we've continued to build on and develop. One of them is something we call Trinity TV, which is an online learning platform. I, in my more big-headed moments, refer to it as a Netflix for education, where students can access live lessons, so recorded lessons that they can dip into. So they study in the First World War. There's a whole suite, a series of lessons with a teacher teaching, resources available for them online, and that's a platform that all students can access. And then alongside the academic side, we provided and developed something called the Trinity Safety Net. And this is an online resource regarding mental health, wellbeing, which Julie, I know, has had a look at, and our parents and our students can access. Through this, they're able to get information about mental health, health issues, things around such as bullying, who to talk to, where they can get guidance. And this is, again, accessed online. All students have access to it, as do the parents. So student support, these are the challenges and what we're trying to do about it. Obviously, the first thing is missed learning. That was a big issue last year when students came back. Is quickly assessing and finding what students had missed, where the gaps were, which students needed interventions, because obviously different students were affected in different ways, with some accessing more than others. But actually, even when we were in school last academic year, some were off more than others due to bubble closures and things like that. So we looked very quickly at what the gaps were, what they'd missed, what key topics they needed, and then we adapted the curriculum around that to make sure that those core subjects, core topics, core skills they needed from year 7, we could teach, so they'd be able to access the year 8 curriculum and all the way through. We accessed and set up in-school tutoring program. We established a learning mentor program. We did literacy interventions, and we made sure alongside that, we had CPD for teachers. That's the academic side again, making sure that teachers could deliver what they needed to do. But then alongside that, we developed other things around student support. So the safety net I've already mentioned, in line with, and this was probably just before it became a really big issue around peer-on-peer abuse, we launched a Call It Out program, which is a way that students can contact online for some support and call issues out where they feel there's been some sort of harassment, and they can access that through the safety net. I'm pleased to say it's not been overly used, but it is something that is high profile at the minute, and we feel students need to feel confident coming forward with. We expanded our pastoral team because, as you'll hear, I'm sure tonight from other leaders, there's been real challenges about students returning to school around behaviour. Leslie's already mentioned suspensions, exclusions, the amounts of issues of sort of violence in the communities we serve, domestic issues, So we increased our pastoral team significantly. We established during from 2018 onwards, really, a school therapeutic team. So we have our in-house therapeutic team to be able to sort of work with the students needing it. We started working with other agencies as well. Invictus Education is one. We continued our family support after COVID. So I think everybody knows that schools stepped up in terms of providing food and essentials for families during lockdowns. But we've actually identified there's a need for that to continue. So, for example, we send out hygiene parcels, food parcels to certain families that we're aware of that need that support, even though we're not in lockdown anymore. And we also, and again, people, I think Leslie's aware of it, we set up our own internal alternative provision called the ARC, which is to cater actually predominantly Key Stage 3 students who we'd identified as being the ones either A, mostly affected adversely by COVID, or posing the most challenging behaviours. And therefore, we want to try and avoid permanent exclusions moving forward. It's been a real success so far. And then brings me to sort of external support and quality assurance. Everything I'm saying, all schools are trying to do. Everyone's, they're all working hard to do the right things for their students. We've tried to make sure that we get the support externally where we can, and also that quality assurance externally, so that we know that what we're doing in a time when you don't just necessarily have the exam results the same, and it's a little bit different. We want to make sure we've got the right sort of support. So we work very closely with SSAT and the Leading Edge Cluster. We've got a good working relationship with William Henry Smith, and that's been very, very useful around some of the students' more high tariff needs at times, making sure that we can get the support for the students that they need. We've worked with B11 on SEN review with a lady called Liz Godman, who actually came to us through working with Calderdale on the Calderdale cluster. We access White Rose Maths, obviously, and Maths of West Yorkshire, which are linked to Trinity and the Trinity Institute of Education. One thing I would say, I think we've really benefited from, and I think we've developed as a school and as a trust, is a really positive and meaningful working relationship with the local authority. We do work very, very closely with the school effectiveness officer, Chris Silger. He carries out various reviews, works on our literacy strategy. He's been into review and work on our SEND provision. He carries out Sarah's performance management. And he also is part of the Calderdale cluster networks. So whether that's in English, whether that's maths clusters, whatever it is, we work with them. We're part of the Calderdale peer review process, which comes through CASH, which has been good. We've worked with Halifax Academy recently, prior to lockdown, North Halifax, Rastrick, Todd. So that's useful. Steve Barnes has been really, really supportive and helpful around safeguarding. You'll all be aware of the number of safeguarding issues that are coming up for young people. And Steve's been a real sort of help in terms of making sure that we're doing the right things, being supportive, challenging when he needs to be. And really, I can't praise him highly enough. Again, around exclusions, Chris Newsom's been great. What I've liked about the local authority, what's really useful for me, is having somebody there to ask the questions that maybe you don't want to answer and provide that challenge, which is always, I think that's an important part of it. It isn't just about them saying, no, you've done everything right, Nick. Trinity are great. I want them to say, well, have you done this? Why haven't you done that? And improve our practice. And I've got to just finally just say a big thank you to Leslie for the support Leslie's provided. Again, right at the top level, being able to just pick up the phone, speak to Leslie, get some advice, Leslie point me in the right direction, point the people at Trinity in the right direction of somebody has been really, really helpful. So thank you. I'm going to stop, share, and hopefully answer any questions, or whether you want to go chair to the next presentation or next person, up to you.
I think we'll probably move. Thank you for that, Nick. Very interesting.
It was a little rushed, so apologies.
Well, we use the PowerPoint, so I think we've invited the heads. I'd like to hear from them, and then we have members' questions piling up. But if anybody would like to add anything to that. Leslie, do you want to go with this side or?
Yeah, I'll hand on now to the next head. There aren't presentations from everyone. Nick wanted to share the work that's gone on there. I know that Karen and Helen also want to just talk a bit about their experience in their own schools as well. So thanks very much, Nick, for that. And it's good to hear that the work that is going on across the board is supporting schools. And the work that Nick spoke about there, the peer review, is one of the examples of work that's going on through the clusters. So that work is funded through the cluster, part of our school improvement work. So that's good to hear. Shall I come to you next, Karen?
Don't I feel like the poor relation? I don't have a PowerPoint, so I'm just, I've got a few scribbled Post-its. I mean, there's a lot of familiar themes that you'll hear from all of us, I'm sure, as Nick says, because we've all been faced with those same issues. The big one for us after the lockdowns was really around the mental health of the children. They've really suffered. We did extended transitions for them to come back into school after each lockdown. We increased the amount of PSHE we did with the children. We allowed and planned for time for them to talk to each other, to talk about their lockdown experiences, their COVID experiences, and time to reconnect with one another. We realised the importance of linking physical activity to emotional well-being, not least because a few of them look like they'd, not that I want to put on a few pounds in lockdown. So we increased, we'd had a mugger put in, we've already got a running track, we got some outdoor table tennis things, and we really pushed the clubs and the physical activity with the children because we realised that was really helping them, because we needed to build the stamina to be able to focus and concentrate again in lessons. We would build in things like brain breaks through lessons where they get up and do things like brain gym to help them to, again, reconnect and refocus on the learning. And in terms of lessons from the lockdown, as all schools did, we started, we created a blended learning strategy during lockdowns, where at the junior school it was Google Classroom, and at the infant school it was Purple Mash, and we kept elements of that because, as Leslie said, all the way through the pandemic we've had children pinging in and out of school. So any child that wasn't able to be in school but was well enough to work, we were able to still use those online platforms to support them to access their learning. It's been really important for us, as with all the schools, staying having those links with our community and supporting our families. That carried on all the way through the lockdowns. And we tried to get as creative as possible. We worked with various things in the community, like the Make Lunch project, the Funky Foods, the food bank, all those sorts of things carried on and have carried on since. One of the big things for us was that use of the recovery premium that we've received from the DfE. So we very quickly, again, just as Nick said, we had diagnostic assessments. The big thing was to find, when they were ready to learn, where are all the gaps, so that we could then set about planning for how we're going to plug all those gaps, which we did through same-day intervention and tutoring. And the big focus, as well as that physical activity, emotional well-being, was the reading and the phonics for us, same for everybody. So we really pushed that. So that's one of the things we're really happy about, because the outcomes are looking really strong on the reading. In terms of support, the local authority, public health, were absolute heroes. I actually don't know how Ben and Naomi coped, because they must have, it was just like hotline public health from all of us. They were absolutely fantastic. The network meetings were really invaluable to us because they carried on in the virtual world. ECLC meetings, which is the cluster of schools I work in, really supportive. The support that we've had from our own school effectiveness officer, Michelle Joyce, is outstanding as always. Leslie's support and Leslie's assistant director updates that come regularly and still come, just always really conveyed that message of you're not alone, because it's really hard when you felt like you're working a little bit of a silo because we're in this virtual world. In terms of going forward, it's about the CPD that the authority have written in through the cluster plans, through the LA plans. So we've accessed lots of mental health training for staff, for the children, which has been really well received. Steve Barnes, like Nick said, has been really, earning his money. He's been doing a fantastic job around safeguarding. And I think going forward, the big thing for us, and when we continued with our broad and balanced curriculum all the way through, apart from music, we couldn't sing sadly, but we are now. It's the mental health issues, that's going to be ongoing. Parent mental health, we're thinking about what can we do to support our parents. it's about that support for our SEND children, because they've still got those significant gaps in their learning, and the support for children with social, emotional, and mental health needs, which I know the authority are looking at and addressing through the consultation that they've just done. But yeah, in terms of Leslie and Michelle and the cluster work and support from the authority, absolutely fantastic.
All right, thank you. Who's next, Leslie?
Then we've got Helen Crowther from Greetland Academy.
Would it be enough just to say everything Karen just said is pretty much what I was going to say. I'll pick a few extra things to share with you guys, because I absolutely, Karen, wholeheartedly agree with everything you said there. Same challenges for us, same support that we've got from the LA. So we are an academy, but we work very, very closely with the local authority, like our colleagues at Trinity said as well. And what I found with the way we operate as an authority is that you can both receive support and give and develop yourselves. And so some of the things Karen mentioned there, I'm going to touch on how we've contributed to it, and also how we've developed from tapping into their services and their CPD offers. If we go back to the first lockdown, which I don't like to think about quite often, it gives me post-traumatic stress, but we were a school, it was 14 years since our last Ofsted inspection, so we were well overdue, and so knew it was coming, and rightly so should come at some point. And what the local authority did throughout that lockdown is still offer CPD, particularly for subject leaders. I can see Karen nodding now. A big drive in the new inspection framework is around our middle leaders, our subject leaders, and how well they can lead their subject, and the support that Leslie and her team gave with regards to that was second to none, and I know will have contributed to the outcome of our report in the end in developing our leaders. In terms of then giving, as we've moved forward, I now lead on one of those, as does another one of my members of staff. So I'm leading the English for subject leaders, and another member of my staff is doing music. And I know that Michelle Joyce got mentioned, but she's tapping into skills across schools in Calderdale so that they can lead these sessions. We are also the DFE English hub for Calderdale, along with Kirklees and Leeds, and we work extremely closely with Leslie and her team, and we are part of the education recovery plan. And obviously we work with many schools across Calderdale on their phonics, but also provide additional training for those that don't get intensive support from us. So we've really been encouraged to be actively involved in that. And I know that any CPD we offer, Leslie and her team share through the various mediums that they can. That's also branched out. I know Chris got a mention, but we as an English hub who specialises in early reading have given some support to our secondary schools as well across Calderdale, in terms of, I think particularly now more than ever, because of the effects of lockdown, there are more and more children potentially arriving at secondary school not able to read. And so we have started to work with our colleagues in secondary to look at how we might support them with that. I do want to reiterate what you said about public health, Karen, because I couldn't agree more. And thinking about even when I was going through my inspection, I'm sure you're the same, Karen, and the guys at Trinity. And before that, the way they have supported schools 24 hours a day has really reduced that kind of workload and stress on our own brains, so that we can focus on our children and teaching and learning and giving them the best offer. So I can't reiterate. And from someone who works in a trust with schools across other local authorities, that isn't necessarily the same message in every local authority. So absolute credit to our public health team and how well they're working with Leslie and her team. And so we get all these joined up messages of support. And then I also agree about the main challenge for us is around mental health still. And a lot of services currently are at capacity. But if I kind of flip that on its head and talk about the positives, we've had 2 initiatives in Calderdale that my school, and I know many schools are benefiting from, that have solved the issue of the main services being at capacity. So we are part of the mental health support team project. We're in the 2nd year project of that. So we have a trained mental health support worker in our school 1 day a week, working with our children, supporting our staff, supporting our parents, and it's an absolute fantastic scheme. I cannot speak more highly of it. But I also wanted to mention Calderdale Cares for You, which is the scheme that was set up to support all local authority workers with their own wellbeing and mental health, providing them with lots of different wellbeing experiences that they can tap into for free. And I've sat on the working party for that, just to help advise, and that's been of real benefit. It's been tough. It's been tough for many, it's been tough for workers in school. And so to have that outlet and that recognition, even that our wellbeing and mental health is important, I think is a real credit to Calderdale as well. So I think that's everything from me.
Thank you.
Yeah. Could I just add two things before we come to the questions and so on? I think that the mental health and wellbeing bit is really crucial, and that's why it's one of the 4 strands in the Education Recovery Plan. And it is the wellbeing of children, obviously that's paramount, but also of adults. And that's woven through, because we recognise that if we're going to provide the very best education for children, we need to have a really resilient and strong and healthy workforce as well. So that's very much part of the Education Recovery Plan. And the mental health support teams work is really running extremely well. So we've got, I haven't got the exact number with me, I'll check on that as we speak, but many of our schools have got mental health workers now working directly in their schools with children. So that's been a real success story, and there are a number of other initiatives around mental health going on as well. Nick earlier mentioned William Henry Smith School, and I just wanted to touch on that because William Henry Smith School is not one of our local authority schools, but it is part of our specialist provision cluster, and it's through that cluster that William Henry Smith, which is a residential school for children with behavioural issues and special educational needs around social, emotional and mental health, works with our special schools as well, and they provide part of our Education Recovery Plan training programme and support for schools in offering their expertise. So that's a really key part of the work as well.
All right, thank you. We'll start on members' questions. So Sue, Councillor Holdsworth. She's going to miss a turn in the queue. Is she not there? We'll go to Diana, Councillor Tremaine. We'll come back to Sue in a minute. She's off making a cup of tea.
Great, thank you. It's really lovely and positive to just hear, just as a comment, just the input from the local authority being so valuable, and the kind of collaborative approach to some of the professional development aspects, which is something that I'm really interested in. So that's just really, really lovely to hear. A couple of questions which might be more general rather than specifically to the heads that are here, but around suspensions. One thing I wanted to note as a positive was that suspensions of children looked after had reduced, which is definitely a positive. I wasn't sure if there was a comparison to national there, and if we've got that, if that's possible. But obviously the one that you raised at the start, Leslie, around primary suspensions being higher in relation to the national average, the regional average. So I just was kind of curious as to why that might be and kind of how that's being addressed a little bit more if possible. Thanks.
Yeah, if I respond to that first, and some of the heads may want to come in as well, but yes, some of the exclusion statistics are not always available by those groups. So I don't think we do have the national figure for children looked after and exclusions at the moment. And the recent report, the virtual school report, I think highlighted that. But we do look at all comparative data where possible. I know our virtual school works with colleagues through the National Association of Virtual School Heads and often discusses those things. So that there's a lot of work that goes on. In terms of the increase that we've seen, some of that is clearly linked to the impact of the pandemic on children and young people. We've heard all the heads talking about the impact on mental health, the extra work that schools are doing to support children who are presenting with more challenging behaviour. And it's really important for us to recognise that when behaviour is challenging, it's a form of communication. It's children letting us know in some way that something is wrong for them or difficult for them, whether that's they've been through some trauma or there's some unmet need there. So in terms of how we're addressing that, we're doing a lot of work. We've started we're starting the week after half term is the first meeting of an inclusion group for us to look at the recent report we've had commissioned on our use of alternative provision and to look at the wider issue of how we can be a truly inclusive borough and how we can have the right support available for children at the right time. In Calderdale, we don't have a behaviour support service. The decision was taken a number of years ago through the schools forum that schools voted to have that funding that used to be de-delegated to fund that service, have that back into schools. So the service ceased at that time. But I think what that did was it gave all the schools a little bit of money back, but not enough to create or have those services that are needed. And we've seen an increase in demand since then. So the inclusion group is going to be looking at how we can work to address that and have behaviour support through almost like a continuum of need for behaviour support. So that at the lowest level, we're identifying need really early, working with children. Quite often behaviour is because there are some issues within the family. There may be domestic violence or other issues within the home that lead to that behaviour becoming challenging. If we can work with that through our early intervention and early help approach and work with the family, we can turn that around quite often. But then the continuum will go all the way up to those children who need specialist support, whether that's through alternative provision or through specialist provision. So that's work that's ongoing now and will be a really key piece for us to move forward on. And we'll be keen to report back to Scrutiny when that work's underway, to be able to report back about how that's going.
Thank you. Councillor Holdsworth. Sue.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask, and this isn't a criticism, but it's a question. I'm on the board of C&K Careers, and it's quite clear that higher numbers of Kirklees school leavers move on to higher education than in Calderdale. And it was mentioned, I think, earlier about the number of apprenticeships that young people moved on to from Calderdale and so forth. And I just wondered, from the head teachers, what do you think is the problem, or what do you think the issue is in that difference between fairly similar local authorities? Why do Kirklees students go on to higher education in higher numbers than Calderdale?
Can I, Councillor Holdsworth, just come in on that? I'll be honest with you, I don't feel in a position to comment on other secondary schools. I think as a secondary school, you look at your cohort and what you can do for them. So actually, as a school, we've seen consistently high numbers going into higher education, going on to colleges, sixth form, particularly with Trinity 6 in the centre of town. We've seen numbers going to that increase. We've seen high numbers going to Calderdale College. We have very, very low number of NEETs. It's difficult to say because it will be, each school serves a different cohort, and the cohorts that attend different are all different. So all I know is that from attending Cash, and Leslie will no doubt back me up on this, is that across Calderdale in the last 5 years, the careers provision and guidance has been something that Calderdale schools have worked on. We work with C&K Careers, for example, very closely. A number of schools in Calderdale have got the Careers Award, Careers Gold Mark, which is sort of evidence that they're doing everything right to meet the Gatsby standards, and I know most schools are working towards that. So I honestly, I think it's far too complex for one head teacher to answer, but I do think that's something that C&K Careers could work with Calderdale heads on, or with Leslie on, or somebody from the local authority, just to provide a bit more breakdown and analysis than just that headline figure, because there will no doubt be more to it, and it'll be a much greyer area than that.
If I can just add a little bit,
Thank you, Ms. Robinson.
If I could add a bit, Councillor Holdsworth, as well, that one of our key pieces of work at the moment is developing a post-16 strategy, very much for that reason. We're looking at our NEET figures. That's always been a real strength within Calderdale. We've seen some shifts during the pandemic, and we want to make sure we're addressing those. We've commissioned C&K Careers to lead on that work, and that's working with all our schools and our post-16 providers to make sure that we've got a very clear strategy, that we are addressing the gaps for apprenticeships and making sure that children are accessing all available routes that are right for them. As Nick said, it's really key that we support children and young people to follow the right pathways for them and open up the opportunities for them. So part of that is looking at vocational training, apprenticeships, working with businesses, but also looking at then routes to higher education as well. So that work's underway, and we've started that with C&K Careers. They're leading on that for us.
Thank you very much.
Perhaps we can ask C&K Careers when they come next month.
Absolutely, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Kingston. Anne.
Thank you very much, Chair. I wanted to ask about the phonics, which was wonderful to see that we're achieving above the national average in the phonics check. And I just wondered, what do you think it is that's leading that? What's creating that difference?
I think there's a very carefully planned approach to that, and Helen Crowther may want to come in on this, because a key part of that is our English hub that is run through Greetland Academy, as Helen said. So we work closely with the hub. They're part of our steering group for our recovery plan, and they provide really high quality training and support. They carry out audits and work with schools to help them make sure that they've got a very clear systematic approach to teaching phonics. So I think we've got some real strengths in that area, that it's a collaborative approach. Our school effectiveness service also run training for schools. So we've just recently run an early reading session. And again, Helen was part of that, so that we are and we provide those free of charge. So we put bids into the partnership board for funding for that, so that our service that runs as a traded service can offer that, but it's free to all schools, so that we remove any barriers and make sure that everybody can access that. We also work closely with Ofsted, and we signpost schools to the Ofsted training and the Ofsted webinars around reading. So it's really sort of a holistic approach, but Helen may want to add more to that.
Yeah, just padding out what you said, I think it's that joined up approach I said, where I'm delivering on subject leader training, the local authority using the English hub. So our heads and other leaders in school are getting the message constantly and from lots of different avenues about the importance of phonics, the importance of making sure you are hitting the government criteria for what is effective phonics teaching. And then clearly, you know, as you've seen from the results, it is having an impact. So it's being driven from all directions. And I think, whereas in maybe some other authorities, some people still haven't got the message about how important early reading is, in Calderdale we absolutely have.
Excellent.
Could I ask another question, Colin? Sorry, not.
We'll go on then.
Something else in the children looked after. I noted the difference about the results, the percentage of pupils achieving at least 5 GCSEs. It looked like, just looking at that and analysing it, that the higher ability children, this is looked after children, are doing better at GCSE, whereas the performance of lower ability children has actually declined, which to me, the word that came to mind was differentiation. What's happening here? Is there something going on in relation to differentiation that's led that disparity?
I think it's a very...
Leslie, before you answer, that same paragraph, 2.27 and 2.28, I've read them, I must have read them 10 times. I'm not sure I understand them. So in your answer, if you sort of, the jumping from 62% in between 2019 and 2020 and 2021, but then you're going about the results declining. Essentially, Anne put that question a lot better than me, but that's the thing that popped out of that report for me. I didn't really understand those two paragraphs.
That might be because of my backgrounds in teaching, Councillor Raystrick.
Okay. Yeah. So if I pick those up first, the first point about the difference between the different ages, the outcomes at the different phases for children. And I think it's a really complex picture for our looked after children, because we're talking about quite small cohorts of children, and we're talking about different cohorts that have had very different experiences. So a lot of the impact of the virtual school and the work that our schools do with children looked after depends very much on when those children, what life experiences they've had, when they became looked after children, when they have had that initial support. So the, I suppose, the stability of their placements and so on, all those things impact on their readiness to learn it and for the virtual school and our schools to have an impact there. So it's really difficult to compare cohort with cohort because we're looking at quite small numbers of children with very complex situations that have an impact on their outcomes. I think there are some real positives in it, that we've seen some strengths in those outcomes, and as you say, for our some of our more able students, they did really well last year, but there has to be that note of caution with that it's that cohort, and the results this year may be different, not because their provision's been poorer, but because of the journey that those young people have been on. So if I can just pick up Councillor Raystrick about the bit that's confusing. So did you say it was 2.27?
2.27 and 2.28, as I say, I didn't understand them.
I think some of that is to do with the way that it's reported. So 2.27 is talking about the GCSE grades at 4 and above in English and maths, and we've seen the positive increase in that for children. Where we then go on to 2.28, we're talking about the 5 GCSEs at grades 1 to 9, which is a very different measure. And looks at a completely different picture there. And I think that I can understand how that information is confusing, and we can certainly look at making sure we present that in a better way for you. But I think if I look at the 2.28, I think that's possibly the one that is confusing. So it talks about the percentage of children achieving 5 GCSEs at grade 4 and above increased significantly. But then the data for 5 GCSEs at grades 1 to 9 has declined. So that's really looking at, there are some children who haven't achieved those 5 GCSEs at any grade. So it is those lowest ability children that are having the impact there. So we've seen some strong improvements for those at the top end of the scales, but we've seen some children who are not achieving many of those lower level grades. But again, that's partly because of the nature of the cohort of those children. I don't know if that explains it any better.
I think I'm just even more worried now about the lower expectations we have for those children. Councillor Monteith, Brenda, you have a question about missing children. There you go, Brenda. Oh, no, you can't. You muted yourself again.
The question is as written in the question.
I'll read it out. Do we know how many CWAT children and young people have not returned to school and who have not been reported as being EHE, is the question.
Yes, again, that's a really key piece of work, and it's something we discuss at our weekly SAFE group meeting, where we meet with head teachers and public health and share key messages. So we're really mindful to have eyes on those children. So we do have some children who haven't yet returned, and we look at those on an individual basis, working with the schools. So the schools work initially with the families to try and engage them. If there's no clinical reason why those children should be absent, then the school would work with them to encourage them to look at the concerns that the family have, but also work with our public health team. They support as well in that circumstance, as very much as our education welfare service. So there would be joint meetings with those families to try and address the barriers and make sure that those children can return. Where needed, our Education Welfare Service then work with the schools to follow the penalty notice route and prosecution if that's appropriate. But we've tried to take a really sort of proportionate response to this, because we recognise that for some families there are some really genuine concerns and reasons that we want to work with them to address those rather than punish the family. But in some cases, there are some families who perhaps have been poor attenders in the past who have used this as a reason to continue with that poor attendance, and it's really important that we challenge that. So we take an individual response to each of those and work with those families. I don't have the exact figures of those, but I can get those. And I don't have just to hand. I've seen another question, Councillor Monteith, that you put in about the number of children who are currently listed as children missing in education. That's something I have got, so I will get that, and if I can bring that into the meeting this evening, I will do, but if not, I'll send that on afterwards.
Circulation afterwards.
Thank you. Thank you. It is the figures that I am interested in, not the reasons. I just need to know how many children have not returned and are not listed as being educated at home, and how many children have, just simply disappeared. They're referred to now as the ghost children, and that's what I want to know about.
Yeah, I'll get you those figures, but we have robust procedures in place for that. I'll get the figures, and then you can you've got those.
Thank you, Leslie. Nick, you wanted to comment on the last item?
Yeah, just if you don't mind, just a couple of things around the 1 to 9s, the percentage getting 1 to 9 and 4+, if you like. The 1 to 9, Leslie said, and the 1 to 9, the figures are lower because of lower ability, but also potentially just down to, through COVID and current climate, non-attendance, and therefore an inability of people to enter grades for students who just weren't attending school in that period, and therefore you couldn't enter them a high grade even though they were a bright student. They just weren't attending, and you didn't have the evidence that was required through the tag process to give them a grade. Does that make sense? So there was some in there that would have dropped off the bottom just due to attendance. Not many, but there will have been some. And then just on the current one, on CME and EHE, I think the ghost children's a very good point to raise. I think the challenge has been, and Leslie's touched on it, we found is the COVID situation has meant that robustly challenging on the one hand, but having a very good reason for being off on the other. So students who were not coming into school but were isolating for X, Y, and Z and were okay to under government guidance, then it's been difficult to bring them back into school and challenge them. So there's a piece of work going on with a group of students who are not back in school, but it's our job to work with the local authority to do everything we can to get them back into school. But the key thing is knowing who they are, which I think most schools do, but it's then getting them back into school and not allowing them to just stop attending.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick. I take your point about 1 to 9s, but it's specifically relation to looked after children. They've always been able to attend school, and 90% of them have been, according to the report we've got in front of us. Helen, Councillor Riveron. Sorry you've been waiting, Helen.
Help if I unmuted myself. Going back to some of the issues mentioned earlier, I think about assessment at Key Stage 4. Now, I know there's no a perfect way of assessing children, and I think some of the things in the last 2 years it suggested like exams were the gold standard. They weren't necessarily. But I think some of the language around this, I do feel a little bit concerned about me. By the way, I was also involved in assessing people in colleges, and I know how difficult it is about what you feel somebody would have achieved and what the evidence that you've got, you can put forward to say they'd achieved and do the difficulties. But I think some of the things like we talked about, there's been consistent what we achieved over 3 years. Worries me a little bit of going back to like the bad old days when I was at school where, 10% got a grade A, 70% passed. And because it was all non-reference, well, we didn't yes, they were always consistent, but it didn't really affect what people achieved, and there wasn't the sort of, or the potential, we were marking children against each other rather than against what they could actually do. And I do sometimes think the sort of language concerns me a little bit, and I'm not arguing for grade inflation at all. Said people have got to be able to proceed to the next grade, but I do worry a little bit about the language. And we are very much in an age of measurement where, there is so much pressure, realise, to produce these measurable achievements. And set against that, there have been recent press stories, and I might not have read them in quite the detail I should, of some private schools where there has been very high levels of grade inflation, and there seems to have been a distinction between what they've achieved and the state sector. We're doing all this, and I accept it's a really difficult situation. Are we sure that we are really affecting not what those young people should achieve, rather than just measuring them against each other?
I'm assuming it's me you'd like a response from on that. So I think the first thing to be aware of is that the process was set up to make sure that, based on what the GCSE expectations, criteria, guidance was, and the grade guidance was, students were able to meet that using teachers' professional judgment. And these were teachers that, for example, across Trinity Math schools, there are exam moderators in every subject that have worked for the exam boards, making sure that they mark papers. There was quality assurance processes across. One thing that I think you said earlier was about what students can achieve, not what they have the evidence that they can achieve, if that makes sense. Well, every year, roughly the same number of students in the country under an exam system get roughly the same number of 4s, 5s, 6s, 7s. That's how it works, because there is a bell curve nationally for GCSE results. It's not often spoken about, but someone somewhere moves the number of students.
They have to agree.
Yeah, which is not a perfect system. No system is. So it came down to basing it on professional judgment, what students were able to produce, and making sure that we weren't overly inflating students' grades, because that was a possibility as well, because students need to get the grades they deserve, and similarly students need to have grades that are, if you like, reflective of what they've done and what they can go on to do. And that's really important, because that places students within a certain area. So what can they do? If every student was given a 9, a top grade, and every student then could do anything, go and walk into whatever it is afterwards, that's not necessarily fair, because the students who would have got 9s are now competing with students who wouldn't have got 9s. Does that make sense? So it's about having.
It wasn't what I was arguing, but yeah.
Yeah, so my point being is around the language, is making sure that it was in line with what we know the professional boundaries are for particular grades, based on what we've had historically. So that's when I said that, it wasn't a case of, you'll notice if we delve into it in sub-subjects, the numbers have said that the grades fluctuate more, but broadly in line with what students from Trinity Academy Halifax have achieved in previous years.
If I could just support that point a little bit, I suppose the conversation, that 3-year trend, I think, Helen, your question was, it was the exam papers that the students sat at Trinity were marked in conjunction with the GCSE exam criteria, and the teachers inputted those grades. And then at a senior leadership level, part of our quality assurance process to make sure that we were sure that our teachers were marking accurately was, we looked at, is that roughly in line with what we would expect based on our 3-year trend? Yes, it is. So we have confidence that the teachers have marked accurately, as opposed to us setting some arbitrary boundary to say 12% of our students are going to get a 7+, 24% are going to get X, Y, Z. It was part of our quality assurance process, as opposed to how we set the boundaries for students. Does that answer your question, Helen?
Well, I've still got some concerns about the reference to the bell curve, but we're not going to solve that one tonight, I accept.
Well, that's a national exam issue, isn't it?
The GCSE system is controlled by higher powers than us, I'm afraid.
Well, it sounds to me like we're sometimes going back towards it was in the back in the Neanderthal age when I sat my O levels. But anyway, as I said, we're not going to solve that one tonight.
When I sat my O levels, they were really hard. Councillor Izzet, Felicity.
Hi, I've just got a couple of questions actually on two slightly different topics. Apologies, my camera's not on, but if every time I turn my camera on, it cuts me off, so I can't. So my first question is around the electively home educated students. Looking at the figures from the report, there are a significant increase, or there's been a massive increase since 2015, and it states that there was a big increase in the autumn of 2020. Now, you would expect there to possibly be a big increase in the autumn of 2020 due to anxieties related to COVID and coming back to school. But I just wondered how many people we have at Calderdale working in sort of the home education team, and what support and sort of safeguarding checks are put in place for these students who are electively home educated now. And secondly is around the point that talks about, I think it's point 2.36, that we're predicting that there's some big changes coming, which I think there needs to be in terms of electively home educated students, and that we're going to need additional resources. Has any of that been built into the budget? Do we know what sort of additional resources are going to be needed? Yeah, so that's my sort of question about electively home educated. And then when we've answered that, I've just got a little bit of question on CPD.
So those are two good questions. So we've asked the elective education resources question before, Leslie, so you'll probably know the answer to that one.
Yeah, well, we have two officers who work on elective home education as part of our Education Welfare Service. And at the moment, we go over and above what's expected of local authorities. But I think that really highlights that we as a local authority agree with many people nationally, including Ofsted, that there needs to be a more robust system around elective home education. And that's why we put in more resource into that service and do more work with those families. So the work starts before families choose to be electively home educated. So our schools work really closely. I'm sure Nick will be able to talk about that as well, about the work that goes on with families to make sure it is the right decision, they're making it for the right decision, that if it's because there's some issue that they feel is not addressed at the schools work to try and resolve that. Our elective home education team then work with the family. We do follow up with families where we feel that the quality of education isn't appropriate, and we do pursue attendance orders where we're able to do that. That's where we feel that the quality of education isn't good enough. Children aren't getting an acceptable quality of education at home, and we can then go through the legal procedure to ensure that they're back in school. But those changes are needed, and there was an announcement made since this report was written that there is now going to be a register of children who are electively home educated. We don't have all the detail of that yet, and that's where we'll need to see about the resourcing. But I think that will be closely tied up with a white paper that's going to be coming out shortly that will include details of local authority statutory duties. And we're expecting that within that there will be details of what those statutory duties will be, obviously, but linked to that then there will also be the resourcing addressed through national government. There are a number of changes afoot about local authority statutory duties. Elective home education is just one of them, but we are expecting more information on that. So in terms of increasing resource within the budget at the moment, we have increased the support for elective home education within our own resources already. We've been able to do that and have that support increased. We did that last year, and we feel confident at the moment we can manage with the resource we've got. But where those changes come in, then we'll need to work with the national guidance on that and address those resourcing issues once we understand what they are.
Before we move on to Felicity's second question, I'll just follow on for that, electively home educated. We're looking to see the number of school attendance orders increase, it says in the report. How many have we done in the last 2 or 3 years? You don't have to answer that to me now, Leslie. Send it to me afterwards, all right?
Yeah, we'll get that.
There is a Felicity.
Yeah, I think
I just wondered if, oh, go on, sorry. I
think in the pandemic, it's been even harder to pursue those attendance orders as it has with some of our other statutory duties around attendance, but we'll certainly get those figures to you, and I'll get them over recent years. And just to pick up on that increase we've seen since 2015, this is a national picture, and something that there's a lot of work going on both regionally and nationally for us to look at that, because it's certainly not a Calderdale unique issue, that.
And I don't think it's even a pandemic issue because the biggest increase in the years 2017, 18, 2018, 19, much bigger than the year. Hard to blame the epidemic for that. The solicitor.
I just wondered if, just before I move on to the question about CPD, because of there will obviously have been some parents that chose to electively home educate due to anxieties related to COVID, and you sort of hint that in the report. Is there work being done with those parents to sort of support them to allow their children to return to school?
Yes, and we're seeing that now. We are seeing children returning to school. That's been that was increasing, and then when Omicron hit, I think that slowed. But yes, that's certainly something that our services work with, and there's a clear procedure for us to be able to support families to get children back into school.
Would you expect the number of electively home educated students to possibly decrease then in the next year?
Yes, we'd certainly expect to see some of those who chose elective home education for pandemic reasons to return. But as Councillor Raystrick just said, this isn't a pandemic alone issue. We were seeing that sharp increase before that. So there is an expectation that there will still be families who choose elective home education for other reasons than for the pandemic. So understanding the overall impact of that will be difficult to measure, I think, because we'll have two competing pressures there, but we'll certainly be able to demonstrate the numbers returning to school increasing.
Fab. And then my second question is around sort of CPD and EBAC. And I should say I am a teacher of an EBAC subject, which is why I'm asking this question. But if you look at the report in sort of 2.12, the only performance measure in which we are performing below national average is the 9 to 5s from an EBAC. So, but that is not touched upon in any priorities later on. However, you do touch upon CPD for subject leaders. And I just wondered how much CPD is being linked to that EBAC, or how much focus has been put in terms of professional development linked to that EBAC, and how much buy-in there is from the schools. Like, we obviously listened to Helen from Greetland, and they've got a great buy-in, but are we getting the same across all schools in Calderdale?
Yeah, I think there's two issues there, because I think part of the issue with EBAC, and again, Nick and Sarah may want to come in on this, because part of the issue we're aware of within Calderdale around EBAC subjects is around modern foreign languages at secondary school, and that has an impact then on the overall EBAC figures. So I'll let Nick and Sarah come in on that in 1 minute. In terms of the CPD, a lot of that focus on subject CPD is for our primary schools, and yes, we do have a really high engagement across our schools, and what we do is look at where we have non-engagement. It's obviously not mandatory, it's for the schools to decide, and there have been a lot of competing pressures for schools in terms of being able to release staff to attend CPD over the last year, but we've actually had really high levels of buy-in to that. As I say, we made it free of charge to break down some of those barriers. And what we do now is we look at where we have low engagement from a school. We use that as one of our indicators in our risk assessments, to have those discussions with the schools to make sure to understand the reasons for not engaging with that, and to understand what work is going on, because they may well be getting that CPD from other sources, particularly if they're in a multi-academy trust, although we have really high take-up from our academies of that training. So it's one of the indicators that we do look at, but the bulk of that subject work is through our for primary schools. Where we do the work with the curriculum in secondaries is we have, as Nick touched on earlier, we have network meetings, and we have curriculum deputies network meetings, which is where things like curriculum development and the CPD for staff is discussed. So I'll just pause to let Nick and Sarah come in there.
Yeah, I was just going to just say about the EBAC 5 and above, or 7 and above, which Councillor Isop mentioned. The actual, that is, I think in Calderdale and across the country, the average entry for humanities is 90+, 95+%. Science is 90% And actually, the national average for entering languages is around 29%, 25% nationally. Sorry, 40% nationally, 29% locally. So the issue is around EBAC entry as to why that EBAC figure is so low. So Calderdale's above, the schools in Calderdale with a high number of MFL students may be above that national average. Those with a lower, the EBAC can only be whatever it is based on how many students do MFL. So the limiting factor on EBAC is, without a doubt, any EBAC measure is MFL entry rates. So I can speak from a school and a trust perspective, from Trinity's perspective, growing that CPD for languages, making sure that we're recruiting, retaining the best languages teachers, and therefore increasing our provision for MFL is what will grow our EBAC 7+, 5+, and so on. And it will be linked exclusively to that delivery of MFL, because across Halifax, for example, 98, 99% of students do humanities and science. So the EBAC then just, and English and maths. So the EBAC is limited predominantly by the MFL entry.
It's interesting then, it just stood out as a, if we're performing so well in everything else, but compared to average, then it seems there's clearly an issue there. And if the issue is MFL, then it seems strange that it's not picked up on in this report anywhere as a priority moving forward. I just wonder if that was all. But yeah, thank you very much for that.
Right. Councillor Durrance, Danielle, if you're still awake.
I am. I've just got some notes, so I'll just flip my screen. I've got a couple of questions, if that's okay. Just let me pull my notes up. The first is on exclusion rates. I'm just wondering if we have the data on how many of those are or have a recognised SEND or EHCP. And do you want me to do all my questions, or do you want me to break them up?
Do them all.
Right. The second one is on 2.12. I've noticed that our Calderdale 2021, we have a slight decline in all the areas on the table. And it says that it would be further explained to me in 2.15. And other than recognising the difference in gender attainment, I'm not sure if I can understand where that would be explained. It asks us not to compare them, but then it says the explanation will be in 2.15. So I'm sorry if I've missed that. The next question is, in regards to Trinity, the external support that you had listed, oh, sorry, I should say that I am a committee member for the Calderdale National Autistic Society. But I just wondered if one of those external supports was the Calderdale ASD team, because I know that they're linking with mainstreams. And finally, on looked after children, particularly in Key Stage 5, we've got 4 students in total that have got an A-level or equivalent. And I just wondered what percentage that was compared to our looked after children, what data we have on whether there are still young people working towards A-levels and what age they was when they got that achievement, if that's possible. And that's them all. Thank you, Chair.
I think the final question, Danielle, could probably be answered by Parvin, who is, I don't think she's here, but you could have that in writing, certainly. The other 3, off you go, Leslie, or whoever wants to.
Yeah, I think there's on the point about 2.15, I think there's an error in there, Councillor Durrance, that I'll need to just go back, because when we wrote the report, that did link to another point that explained about the inability to compare and the factors around that, and clearly that's been moved in one of the edits. So I'll address that and just clarify. But it was around explaining why it couldn't be compared, rather than explaining that change in the data. In terms of the exclusions of children with special educational needs, yes, I can certainly, again, when I send through the rest of the data that's been asked for, I'll include that. That's one of the things that we look really closely at. And it's one of the factors that we looked at our recent Wicked Issues Forum when we were looking at exclusions, about that we do have a high proportion of children with special educational needs, particularly at special educational needs support level rather than educational health and care plans, who have suspensions or fixed term exclusions. And that's one of the factors that the inclusions group is focusing on. And it's about us making sure we've got that behaviour support service, we're identifying special educational needs at the earliest opportunity, and working with our specialist provision cluster and our special needs services to make sure we've got access for all schools to that support at the earliest opportunity. Yes, we do have those figures, and we'll get those to you. Sorry, can you just remind me of I wrote two of those questions down. I missed it was the second question that you asked. Just remind me of that one.
Was that in relation to the looked after children?
Can you just repeat the question, Councillor Durham?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't know if Councillor Raystrick had said Parveen would answer. I was asking, we've got 4 young people that are looked after that have obtained a level 5. I was just asking what percentage that was, and in regards to the remaining percent, do we know how many of those are still in education or work and training? And yeah, that was
we can get that data and send that to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Particularly to everybody, Leslie, please.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
I also asked what age they were when they got that level 5. Whether it was, is that okay?
Yeah, I'll circulate it to everyone. I'll send it through to the committee to go out.
Councillor Foster, Dot. Hello.
Hello. Right, I have a couple of questions. They're both fairly similar in nature, but slightly different topics. So the first is on long COVID and whether or not you are aware of any children whose education has been impacted by long COVID. And if so, what is specifically being done to support them get back into school and with their education in the meantime when they're not able to be in school? And the second question, this is sort of picking up on news reports about the state of private rented housing and of some social housing as well, and the very poor state of some of it. And are you aware of any children whose housing situation has significantly impacted their education? And are there any ways of highlighting that in particular and supporting those children? I know there's one teacher in Leeds who has a campaign about getting beds for children, where she's uncovered an astonishing number of children who don't even have a proper bed to sleep in. So are we looking at sort of anything along those lines as well, just so that we can ensure that children have the best possible chance to learn? Because if you're knackered and you're not sleeping right, then you're not going to learn, are you? So yeah, if you could sort of do your best with those two. They're a bit random, sorry.
No, they're not. In terms of long,
I think knackered is a technical term.
Yeah. I don't actually have any figures, and I know that Ben's on the call and may want to come in from a public health point of view. I don't have any data in terms of the number of children who have been diagnosed or identified with long COVID, but in terms of what's done to support any child who's off school for any extended period of time through ill health, we have a medical needs team. They work really effectively. Again, I think that's one of our strengths in Calderdale. They have really good outcomes for the children with any sort of medical need, and there's a clear process there for those children to be supported. So it would be a combination of support from the school and from that medical needs team if that was appropriate, and we would be picking those children up as we would any other child who had any sort of long-term medical condition. And then in terms of the I don't know if actually, Ben, do you want to come in on anything on long COVID before I move on?
The only thing I wanted to add is at Scrutiny last time, we said we'd provide you with an update on some modelling that we've done around long COVID in children and young people. My colleague's still just finishing that off, but we will be circulating that as soon as we've got it. It's an inexact science, partly because diagnosis is really difficult actually, but we'll share with you what we've got, and it should be with you certainly before the next scrutiny panel. I know my colleagues well on with it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. And then on the second point around the impact of poverty on families, yes, I think as we heard earlier, it's one of the things our schools have worked really hard at, and our early years settings in working to support families. We haven't done any work particularly to look at housing. That feeds into our procedures around supporting children and families, particularly around things like neglect, if that is an issue. But for many of those families on low incomes, it's not about neglect, it's about the families not having the money to be able to provide the support that's needed. So, so our schools and social care services and early help services work really closely in those areas. We share information, we try to work with the families at the earliest opportunity. We signpost to all the support that's available. So some of our other services within the council, our customer services team and our neighbourhoods team work with us on that as well. So it's very much, again, a joined up approach. We've accessed an awful lot of support through the voluntary sector as well. And so there's a lot of conversations that go on about how we can make sure that we're providing that information to families, we're signposting to the support that's available, and we're accessing the right services that we can and make sure that those families are well supported. Because for most of those families, it's not around neglect and a safeguarding issue, but it does present a safeguarding concern for those children because their needs aren't necessarily being able to be met.
Exactly. It's not the will to meet the needs, it's the lack of ability through finances, isn't it?
It is. And we're seeing, you know, again, our schools and settings go way above and beyond and work with our council services. But, you know, we've seen them providing clothes and food, as we heard earlier, you know, still food deliveries going on now. You know, many of our schools are providing food over and above the free school meal offer because they're just aware of the pressure that families are under. We've also had the support through the Healthy Holidays scheme, which is again about supporting those families on low income during school holiday times as well.
Thank you, Leslie.
All right, thank you. That's the end of that item, members. I think we broke the world record. I'd like to thank Sarah, Nick, Karen and Helen. I always say the same thing. Members of this board derive great benefit from speaking to people who are not council employees. I think this item has been absolutely really fantastic. Some of the great work that's going on. I did expect it, and it's glad to get my expectations met. I'd just like to say thank you to everyone, really, from schools to Leslie and all her team, and Ben, who's still on the call. And I hope he always listens to me, does Ben, even though I haven't got his video on. Really a fantastic item. I hope you've enjoyed it. Meeting with Scrutiny. We've certainly enjoyed having you. Thank you for spending an hour and a half in our time.
Yeah, thank you.
If you want to stay for the rest of the meeting, you're more than welcome. But I imagine you've all got better things to do.
Thank you. I'll just go get
Everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, members, that was a long one, but I think it was well.
Very good.
Absolutely, really fascinating stuff. Yeah, very good. Item 6, Trinity and Claire, I think, by the look of it. Colonial young people, impact of climate anxiety. How are we doing this?
So should I just present the paper?
Just talk to Trinity. We've all read it. What? Yes, you do what you want to do. You do your thing, and then we'll do our thing.
Okay. Yeah, I can read it out, and then I can speak a bit about it, if that would work.
Well, you don't need to read it out for me. So we've read it. Just read about it. Okay. Tell us how you feel.
Yeah. So on like our average, this is how we feel as a youth council, how most young people feel about climate change, and like an example of this that I can just give is that, for example, when I was in year 3, which was 9 years ago now, whilst we were being taught about climate change and you know, the small things that we could do, like on our part, for example, recycling and walking to school. We were also taught how to protest on the issue, and we had like a lot of protest practice in our school playground. And I think that speaks a lot for itself, showing that we have this idea taught to us from such a young age, that we have this massive responsibility, and even after the 9 years, we still see these like sort of protests, but not much change, which I think just makes us feel quite hopeless, and that we aren't being listened to, and that we are just being given a burden to carry in the future. And then also I've mentioned on a more positive note what Calderdale Youth Council have been doing to sort of tackle climate change issue. Something that I was involved in, for example, was the Flood the Valley with Fun, which was a festival that we did at the end of August, where we were raising awareness about the local floods and collecting funds for the flood defense team. I'm open to any questions or comments as well.
All right, Penny, so I'll start, but I'd just like to ask Julie, what is the CYP director doing about climate change? And is anybody listening? Is the cabinet listening? I would say that the actual report itself, I was quite anxious reading it. That it seems that young people are getting really, really anxious about it. What is CYP as a director plugging into the council overview of what we're doing about it from a young person's point of view?
Thanks, Councillor Rosetrick. I think there's quite a lot happening, but it is across the council. It's not just in CYP, but we've all got our part to play in this. As you know, the council has declared a climate emergency. And interestingly, we've been reporting on every scrutiny and committee report for a long time around the climate implications of any report that we bring to you. And you've heard when we've talked to the social work teams recently, when they've come to scrutiny, about reducing that carbon footprint, these ways of working. So the whole of the workforce isn't travelling long distances unless it absolutely needs to. We're not going to Leeds, for example, to some court hearings. They're being done at Princess Building. So the whole way we're working, the whole way of remote working, our ability to communicate with young people using new technology is reducing that carbon footprint and those unnecessary particularly travelling up and down the borough. Previously, we would have had people coming down through Todmorden all the way down through the valley into Halifax for meetings. It doesn't have to happen. I was in Princess Buildings yesterday. There were some members of the staff in the team, but there were other team members up on this type of screen doing what we call a hybrid meeting. So I think in terms of operational delivery, things have really changed over the last 2 years, and the pandemic has actually driven that in a real positive way. I think with the Youth Parliament, we've got some incredible advocates, and one of our young people, Will Solomon, I don't think everybody in Scrutiny will know, but some of you may know that Will actually went to COP26 and spoke very eloquently on behalf of our young people. And as Pranitha has described tonight, young people are worried about this and do very much see this as their future. And what are we going to do to very quickly bring us in line and reduce carbon emissions? And it's a whole council approach. And we have done a lot of work with schools as well. And you had a petition, if you remember, a couple of years ago from one of the pupils at Savile Park, who was really concerned about parents dropping children off at the school gates and idling, just leaving their cars running outside with all the emissions, etc. So, we're doing an awful lot of work with schools. We're encouraging children to walk to school and parents not to use the cars wherever possible. We've done a lot of work on safer streets with our public health colleagues about actually blocking off roads, as you know, and streets in certain schools to make it feel safer and more community-based, and young people really like that. But it's the power of the young people, and it is the biggest priority for our youth parliament, along with other issues as well. But it clearly is a topic for a hot topic for them. We did have a session, Pranitha. I can't remember if you were there. There were a lot of people there. We did a regional session in the council chamber in Halifax, and it was for the youth councils across the Yorkshire and Humber. And Holly Lynch came as the MP for Halifax, and Councillor Wilkinson and myself to listen directly to the young people. We broke into different groups and listened directly to them about what some of those concerns were. So it's two things for us. It's doing everything we can through the system, working with public health colleagues, looking at our own carbon footprint of how we travel and get to work, and just making sure operationally, we're reducing as much as that as we can, but working with the schools as well, because clearly this is a huge concern, to most young people and particularly to young people in the borough.
Thanks. Councillor Kingston. Anne.
Thank you very much. I've got my usual thing with acronyms that I always spend most of my time preparing for these meetings, trying to work out what the acronyms mean. So ACE Awards, that's not something that I've come across before. I'm guessing it's addressing the climate emergency. Is that what it stands for? What's involved in an ACE Award? How do people get an ACE Award? What are the criteria that are used for awarding them?
Pranitha, are you okay if I answer this? Yeah. So the young people did training for school governors about it. So it is action for the climate emergency. It took them ages to design the name. There's a whole load of slides if people want them, and it's for a whole school approach, and it's for every school in Calderdale to sign up for. So so it starts off with quite simple things from things like looking at whether you have alternative to meat options in your school lunches, how much plastic school lunches are packed in, stuff like this are picked, but it goes right through to looking at your energy supplier. The Youth Council have invited Solar for Schools to come and speak to them a couple of times and talk about they can replace your electricity bills by having solar panels. So there's a range of options. It's a really detailed program, and it's been launched to school governors initially, and then each school has got a partner each school governor that went on that has got a partner member of the Youth Council to have a conversation with while they look at it, or if they need any further presentations. And interestingly, Will, who's very heavily involved in this bit, is also sitting on the DFE youth board looking at rolling it out nationally. So they're using his model, well, our Youth Council's model, as maybe the national model for schools to become greener. But it's a bit like Lots of Schools Award. You get a different plaque depending on the level that you reach. Right. So it's got a simple thing, and then like if you want to do a whole school approach, it's got a whole school approach. Does that help? But we could certainly give Lauren a copy of the presentation of
please.
ACE Awards just for everybody's interest.
Yeah, that'd be great. Julia, are we supporting this?
I missed that bit, sorry.
Sorry, I was asking Julie if you were supporting it as a council.
Yes, yes, we are. I think Leslie wants to come in, Councillor Oastrick as well.
Leslie?
Yeah, climate change is part of the Education Recovery Plan because we recognise the impact on how important it is. It's the one priority that students tell us is their main concern, and the impact of that on anxiety and well-being. So it's part of our well-being strand, and the ACE Awards is part of that. So there's work going on. There will be more work going on to promote this with schools and ensure that we can get more schools to take this up and engage with it.
Well, thank you. Felicity, Councillor, is it?
Hi, I just wondered, because obviously I'm quite new to the scrutiny panel, what the purpose of this report was for. Was it just to give us an idea of what young people thought, or?
Yes, yes, it was. It came up from the young people themselves, particularly from the Youth Parliament, about their absolute key priority, and Scrutiny agreed as part of the work programme this year, that it would be really good to hear from the young people themselves about why it was worrying for them and what we were doing in response. We did invite Councillor Scott Patient, who is the Cabinet Lead for Climate Change, but unfortunately he couldn't attend this evening. But I think Councillor Courtney has got some comments from Councillor Patient. She has got her hand up as well. Councillor Raystrick, if it'd be okay to bring her in now.
I've got a few more questions as well, if I can, but I can do it either way.
You'll finish off, Councillor. Is it? I would say that...
Because I was just...
I'm making that noise. I've got a thunderstorm at the moment. I don't know if anybody else can hear it in the background. It's absolutely racketing it down. It's about listening to young people rather than talking to them.
Mike, I just how this, like, how the data was gathered or the base for this, because it's an incredibly well written report. But as you said, Councillor Raystrick, some of the language is quite shocking, such as the increased mental health due to the panic of climate change. And I just wondered if this is based in a survey of a large sample size, or if this is just youth parliament people who have come together, or if it's indeed just one member of the youth parliament. Because I just think if it's only a small sample size, it could be giving quite a narrow view of something. Because as a science teacher, I teach about global warming, and I teach for a massive multi-academy trust, so from schools in Hull all the way to Doncaster. And the feeling that I would get from teaching this subject to a large number of 16-year-olds is not quite the feeling that's portrayed in this report. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be doing anything about it. I'm not saying that we shouldn't, because I agree it is an issue, but the language is quite emotive and quite shocking, and I just wondered whether the sample size was big enough for us to be putting everything behind it, if that makes sense, and if it's a real true picture of the actual secondary school students across Calderdale, or even primary school students, to be fair.
I'll let somebody else answer. It's very interesting in the EHNA that comes next. We don't ask climate change questions, but perhaps I think Ben would say that we should. Claire.
So one of the reasons that it's quite emotive is that young people in Calderdale, this is their really big issue, and they do lots and lots of additional work on this, perhaps more than other subjects. But there is actual research that so some of the research is based on their conversations with their peers, and the rest of the research is based on national surveys that have been done, particularly COP26 and the school strikes and the Teachers for the Future organisation. So while there may be a bias to it, based on the youth council's interest, that is their understanding of their peers that they talk to, but also the research that they have looked into. Because to be fair to them, particularly the Green members, the ones that are really passionate about the green issues on the youth council, they are very, very well researched and well informed young people, and they hold their own on the climate emergency committee, because they will have read the papers on the Brown Land, the proposed extension to Leeds Bradford Airport. We had a whole conversation about that. So they are very, very well researched. But I could certainly ask them to let you know the research that they've used. But it was the combined effort of people's feelings in the meeting also informed that paper. We had a session when all the young people talked about what their friends had said to them and what they themselves felt.
I just think that if a youth parliament would naturally be inclined to attract a certain demographic, a very passionate person who was, do you see what I mean? And I just wonder, I just think it's, and I agree there are lots of students that are worried, but equally there are lots of students that are worried about lots of other things too. And it's the language we're using is quite strong. That was I just wanted to give a bit of a slightly less strong viewpoint from a sort of my experience of teaching climate change to 11 to 16-year-olds.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, but I think when they have conversations with their peers who maybe haven't thought about it before, and they've seen things like they are talked about as being the future, you are the last generation that's going to have the planet as it is, that feels like a massive responsibility to young people when they hear that language from the adults and from the media. I'm speaking on their behalf, Praneeth, am I being...
We won't go into the media.
No, but if we're talking about things have an impact on young people, that is something that they are really conscious of. that they keep being talked about. You know, you will be left with this earth that's been damaged by your peers, and it feels like a massive responsibility for young people once they've cottoned onto that. And yes, our young people are very passionate about that, but they are having conversations with their peers about it, but they're also listening to their peers. And can I also say they're really, really positive about making change? They're not just putting their hands up in the air and going, this is terrible, but what they're saying is, we want to make it different, but we have to be empowered to do that.
I would be really interested if, you know, the surveys that you've mentioned, just from my own teaching perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. No worries. I'll ask our climate. I'm seeing them tomorrow evening, so we'll so you get a copy of the surveys that they've looked at.
Send them to Lauren, Claire. I'm going to go to Sarah now because, well, she had her hand up first.
Well, what I was going to say is maybe Ben, maybe we should go to Ben, because I think Ben was going to address that point specifically. Is that right, Ben, about children's feelings? So I'm happy to defer to Ben if that's okay, and then come back in.
Okay. Ben, then.
Thank you, Chair. All I wanted to say really was I think, look, it's really important that we hear what children and young people are saying. It's qualitative research is just as important as quantitative research. You mentioned the EHNA, and you'll have read in the report that we want to put some questions in there about climate change. And I think the public health team and the experts we've got in there around asking surveys in a way that I suppose meets the standards of research. We'd love to work with the Youth Council, the Youth Parliament, to build that into the survey in future years, so that we've got something that does cover a range, you know, a much broader range of children and young people, and gives that assurance that that councillor is wanted to raise earlier, really, if that's okay.
Yeah, fine. Diana, Councillor Tremaine.
That was exactly the point and question I was going to make, actually, was in terms of the health needs assessment. Is that something that we can work with the Youth Council on in terms of getting those questions in there and just getting, you know, a bit more detail on that? Because I think it would be really, really interesting to see that, and just to get a real sense of that right across the board. So yeah, that was exactly the point I was going to make. So Ben said it already.
Yeah, we're wandering into the EHNA already. Let's see where we are. Councillor Foster.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to say thank you very much to Pranita for this report. I think it's really, really interesting. And it's a bit of a wake-up call for us as adults to be reminded that actually our actions as adults have impacted the planet to such an extent that it is going to make things really difficult for the next generation. And you know, I think it's a bit of a wake-up call. So thank you very much for raising this, Pranita. It's really, really good. And I think, you know, mental health problems being caused by the panic created around climate change. Yes, absolutely, there is panic around it, because it's suddenly dawning on us that, oh dear, we haven't got very long to do anything about it. So yeah, just a thank you, but not so much of a question, but a thank you.
Can I come in now?
Yes, if you want to, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, so I just want to say, yeah, thank you very much to Pranita and the other members of the Youth Council. It's I know very well about the urgency that young people feel around this as well. And I mean, you know, yes, it might not be the absolute top priority for every single young person, but I absolutely agree that it's a very widespread concern, and something that is our responsibility as adults. And I think that's absolutely right, that it's important that, you know, some of us at least are listening and are really interested and want to make a difference. And I just wanted to, so I'm not going to read the whole thing out, but Councillor Scott Patient has indeed sort of set out a good list of all the well, a lot of the things that the council are doing. That's now obviously you'll know some of this from your colleagues, Pranita, who are on the Climate Emergency Committee, will know some of this stuff. But I'm really happy to pass on the list. There's quite a list of different things that the council is doing. I think it was Leslie or Julie mentioned about the fact that that young people brought up issues around, cars idling, and actually that's something then that the council did, is started slapping fines to, giving fines to people whose cars were idling in the areas around schools and stuff, with a recognition that is a real problem for air quality. I know that that's not sort of specifically just climate change, but it is about how listening to the concerns of young people and trying to do stuff. As I said, there are quite a long list of different things that the council is doing, and I'm really happy to pass that on if that hasn't already been passed on to you at the youth council. I mean, I could sit here and read it out, but it would take about half an hour, and I don't want to waste everyone's time more. Not that it's a waste of time, but you get what I'm saying. But Praneeth, if I'm really happy to do that, and thank you again.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll add my thanks to Praneeth as well. A very provocative article. Yeah, very provocative. So thanks for that, Praneeth and Claire, for helping out. Item 7, members. Electronic health needs assessment. As always, this is a fascinating document. I read through it, and half the time you're going, what? It's a bit like, you're just thinking, what the hell's going on here? But I'm going to start with a more general point, Ben, and the purpose of this health. And on page 34, as a council, despite a sound evidence base, we invest more in older age groups than we do in the early years. It is important to recognise that the resource we allocate to early years should be seen as an investment in the future prosperity of the borough rather than a service cost. I'm almost speechless. How is the EHNA going to help that? And why aren't we doing it now? We've been banging on about early intervention for as long as I can possibly remember, before I had a beard.
Do you want me to come in there, Chair?
Yeah, that was the end of my rant, Ben.
Right, fair enough.
I'm very aware of the fact that I might be getting cut off every month because I've got a real thunderstorm going on. It's quite interesting. I'm going to open my curtains in a minute.
So I think all I'm saying when I write that is that when you look at a council, how much we spend proportionally on different age groups, it's tilted more, and not just as a council, actually as a system, including the NHS, it's tilted much more towards the older age range than it is the younger age range. And actually, if we invest in our younger people on a whole range of issues, not just public health issues, but also in terms of their more generally in terms of their well-being and enabling them to have good education and go on and get good jobs, good careers, and all of that sort of thing. In the long term, that's going to lead to a reduced cost for us in terms of the older age. And I suppose the point I'm making is it's easy to focus on fixing things that are wrong in the older age people rather than investing in the future of the younger people. And it gets more and more difficult for us to shift that balance with the resource challenge we have in public services at the moment. And that's the only point I'm trying to make there, I think. Julie's nodding, and Julie and I have this sort of conversation quite regularly, Leslie too. It's something that we're spending a lot of time working out how we get the maximum impact from the money we do put in. But it's never as much as we'd like, let's be honest. But I'm sure anybody who worked in any bit of the sector would say they'd like more resource to be able to do more work with whoever they worked for.
Singing to the choir, I call that, Ben.
Yeah, I do my best, as you know, Chair.
Preaching to the choir. And Councillor Kingston.
Preaching to the choir, I'm going to do the same thing, just bearing in mind that when I did a degree in education, and it came through loud and clear that all the research points to that early intervention, that early education creates later success in terms of educate. That the more someone learns in the earlier stages, the better able they become to learn later. So it's just loud and clear that that should be where the focus is. And it's disappointing to see that that's not being prioritised as much as it could be here in Calderdale. On the report, it said going forward, questions will remain stable over time, allowing for a clearer understanding of change over time. And I just wondered, because we've changed the questions, were the questions previously consistent? And were we, because I'm new to this, have we seen change over time previously, a positive change over time through this data, the collection of this data, which has been 9 years in primary and 11 years in secondary? Off the top of my head, I'm remembering those figures.
Chair, I've brought a colleague with me, Naomi, and you've heard a bit from schools about Naomi's work on COVID, but Naomi also leads on this. So are you okay if I bring Naomi into?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love new people.
I'm going to leave my video off because I'm having internet issues, but I am here. In terms of the questions and them staying consistent over time, we brought the H&A in-house in 2018. So previously it was run by an external organisation who we funded to do it for us. And until that point, we didn't have any ownership of what questions were asked. By bringing it in-house, it allowed us to take a really long, hard look at the questions we were asking. And what became very quickly apparent to us is that we were asking questions that weren't always externally validated. So weren't always robust in measuring what we hoped they were measuring or thought they were measuring. So although they were consistent over time, they didn't necessarily always have that external validity. So by bringing it in-house, that allowed us to really shake things up and look to questions that were externally validated and questions that schools were comfortable with. So particularly primary schools are a little bit uncomfortable with some of the questions in terms of exposing children to concepts that they hadn't previously been exposed to. And we've been able to really soften that and lessen that impact by bringing it in-house. Looking back though at the previous survey, so pre-COVID, there was a lot of stability in question responses over time. And if anything, things improved over time. I think what we've seen this year, and you only have to look at that report, the way that I've formatted the report this year is quite different to what we've had previously. It was quite a narrative report previous to COVID. Stripping it back this year, it started because I was still really tied up in COVID response and didn't have time to really do that narrative. But actually, as I worked through it, I think what I've been able to present this year is something that really shows the data much more clearly, so much more data heavy. And there are lots of reds in there. What we can say quite definitively now, because in 2019 we used robust, valid indicators, and we've used those same questions in 2021, that change is real. All the reds that we're seeing in the report this year, that is real. That is a very different experience for young people. In the height of the pandemic, I think it's important to note that this survey was done in spring 2021. So right in the thick of COVID, right in the thick of young people being exposed to the very height of that disruption, both to their school life and to their home life. But it's impacting, as we can see through the surveys, impacting on all areas of health and well-being. The things that really stand out are the emotional well-being, but you can see in terms of physical health, so felt general health and health behaviours, as well as risk-taking behaviours, there's a downturn in all of that. Health outcomes are worse in secondary age students than they are in primary, which is probably quite predictable. And really notably different between year 7 and year 10. Again, perhaps predictably. What we've looked at this year that we don't always look at for all the questions is the gender difference. And there's quite a clear gender difference as well. Outcomes are worse for girls than for boys, particularly once you get into high school and particularly for year 10. So that's the survey, and hopefully answers your question around the indicators themselves and what the survey is showing. Just to pick up on some of what's been discussed here this evening in terms of the so what, we know what COVID has done to young people, and I think all that the HNA does here is highlight that. We have always drawn quite heavily on the survey results in public health in terms of what we do, what our public health in schools coordinator does when she goes into schools, talking to them about the results and the sorts of things that are out there to support schools. But through COVID, we've been able to do far less of that, but actually we've worked much more closely with schools than we ever have before. And I think that gives us a real springboard going forward, that we've worked more closely with schools and worked more closely with education on what we do in schools. Hopefully the new Developing Well piece of work, that programme will mean that we can work together collectively across the system to address some of these things, and involve young people in that. You know, we've seen from the discussion about climate change what really matters to young people, and at the moment that's not reflected in the HNA. I think we'd said when we brought the HNA last time that we were going to look at climate. Obviously COVID got in the way of that, but it's absolutely the right thing to do to relook at that for 2023. There's also the Education Recovery Programme, which Public Health are really closely involved with. And through that, we're already progressing at pace, actually, just in the last few weeks, developing a Healthy Schools programme to celebrate all the fantastic things that schools are doing, but to help them to do even more of that and share learning with each other. So there's lots in the pipeline in terms of the so what, which I think is as important, if not more important, than the survey results themselves.
I think the survey results next year will be very, very interesting. If I can just give you a few of the what comments that I'd like to make, and then I have a real good question at the end of it, or not. Well, I have a question, but it's good enough. The first thing I got was a third of young primary school teachers eat at least 2 packets of crisps a day and 2 chocolate bars. And 1 in 5 of them are eating 2 fizzy drinks, drinking 2 fizzy drinks. We wonder why we've got a child obesity problem. We've spent loads of money on healthy living, and are we getting any better? You don't have to answer that question at the moment. It was interesting that 46% of people have been bullied at school. Maybe I should have asked that question of the head teachers. Do we think that's right? I keep going and going and going. 35% of young people have self-harmed. I brought this up the last time it came. How many of these are an emergency? And then the biggest of all, 61% don't feel safe online. And yet we're spending nationally and locally millions of pounds on this. Are we spending it in the right way? Are we not spending enough? It's highlighting the very things that we should be working on: childhood obesity, not feeling safe online. I won't even go into the smoking ones because I have a vested interest, but are we making any difference, or are we just measuring the difference? And that's one question. The other one is, I read the comments about demographic, and 17% are LGBT. Does anybody believe that? 4% have no gender. I don't want to put my foot in the gender argument, but does anybody believe that either? And then there was silence. Can nobody hear me?
Shall I come in there just in terms of the feedback we get from schools? Because schools are our biggest sense check for EHNA. And schools will highlight to us quite willingly, and have done previously, on things that they don't think stack up, things where they think that young people have misinterpreted the question. So we've had this for primary school questions in particular before we changed the questions, things that don't ring true on the ground. There hasn't been any of that noise this year at all. There's always a sense that young people will tick boxes to show off to their peers. What we try and do when we set up the survey and ask schools to conduct it in a certain way is that they sit young people apart from each other, so that young people can answer the questions in confidence, and also so that there isn't any of that camaraderie and showing off and ticking boxes to make your friends laugh or whatever else. So do we know 100% that everything that is measured in the survey is bang on correct? No, but we do work to try and make sure that it is as robust and as rigorous a process as it can be, recognising that it's a pupil survey and not a hard and fast piece of research.
All right. Councillor Durham, Danielle.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered, we've got obviously all the breakdowns in one sense, but I just wondered, do we have any demographic information on areas that these children have come from? They could be, well, for me, it could be broken down further, and I just wonder if we have that data. So, you know, the children that are not necessarily getting breakfast, do we know more about their family circumstances, the level of deprivation that they come from, all this kind, because I guess I'm thinking the same as Councillor Raystrick. Without that information, how do we know where to target change directly and not blanketing just an impact of change across the board? And I don't know if these are anonymised or if we can really start breaking down in order to kind of put a plan together on how we can improve some of what we know.
I would say I'm not sure you want me to start thinking like me, Danielle.
Shall I come in again there and respond to that one?
Go on, Naomi. You're on a roll.
So the survey is anonymous, and I think it needs to be. I think that there's good reason for it to be, so that students can answer openly and honestly. But we do collect socio-demographic data. And one of the things that we wanted to do when we brought the survey in-house that we had no control over before was really doing some of that disaggregation, so breaking down some of these responses by different groups, so by whether children identify as LGBT, whether they're from particular schools, particular parts of Calderdale, whether they're a young carer, that's another thing that we pick up, whether they've got a long-term limited illness. So we've now got the functionality within the data to unpick some of that. Our back-end process at the moment is really clunky. It's really time-consuming to manipulate the data, even to get it to this point. So one of the things we've got in the pipeline for next year is putting all of this onto a digital platform so that we can automate some of that, manipulating that data and really get more out of it in terms of how these findings are playing out for different young people across Calderdale. So hopefully that's what we can do next time.
Can I just ask Naomi? Sorry, Chair, I hope this is okay. If they're anonymised, how do you know that they're SEND? How do you know that they're young carers? I'm not quite sure I understand that. I don't know if I'm seeing this wrong, and that, you know, you've placed a group of young people in a room carefully, but other than everybody being given a pen, there's nothing that would specifically highlight that. So that's not anonymous up to a point. And I'm just wondering, and the other question was, if you are looking specifically at the demographics depending on the school, is that the information on the school's demographics in the area they're in rather than the pupil as an individual? Because obviously we all know that, you know, our family makeup can be different depending whether some students travel in or don't travel in. Does that make sense, Naomi? Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a perfect science. We do ask students whether they're a young carer, and we ask particular questions that are actually copied over from the ONS National Census in terms of identifying long-term limiting illness, so things that affect students' day-to-day lives. In terms of the demographic, the area demographics, we ask students where they live broadly. I think it's down to ward. It might be to the first bit of postcode. I can't remember off the top of my head, but we do have some area demographic breakdown.
Do you ask if parents are in work or anything?
No, not
Right.
at this point.
No worries, thank you.
Diana, Councillor Tremaine.
Yeah, it was just kind of extending a little bit on what Danielle was saying, really, was looking at those breakdowns, the comparisons between groups and things, and thinking about how that can then be used to put in place some of the actions that, you know, we've talked about throughout the evening, I suppose, because there obviously are some groups where those issues seem to be stronger and need looking at a little bit further. So it was really just trying to get a bit more of an idea about where that goes. So kind of leading on from what Danielle was asking.
If you look at the COVID analysis at the end of the report, that's the start of us really trying to drill down into the data, where we've looked at gender, which I've done through the main report, but also looking at ethnicity, the long-term limited illness bit, sexuality, area deprivation and young carer status. And you can see, just in terms of how those things are played out through lockdown for young people, you can see massive disparities there. It's that I'd really like to pick up and pull right through the whole report for next time, because I think what we're seeing there with COVID impact, I think we'd see for those other indicators as well, in terms of the relative impact.
Yeah, and I suppose what I meant was, so then how does that help to inform what happens next in terms of what we're putting in place in terms of support within schools, in terms of thinking about, you know, approaches. We talked the other week about trauma-informed approaches and that kind of thing, which obviously seems really relevant in this kind of situation. So can that then be sort of drilled down and targeted at some of the areas that seem to need it most, hopefully? Is that the kind of long-term plan?
Yeah, it certainly should be. Just from a public health perspective, in terms of what we do, is that universal approach, but then a targeted approach where there's a need, and that's what I think the HNA can help us with, but we haven't done that to date.
Anne, is that a new hand, or is that an existing hand, or is that a new hand?
It's a new hand.
Oh, well, go ahead.
It was just about your question that you raised about the demographic profile in the LGBT area. And I wondered, I think that the percentages there, 18% who define their gender as other, for example, I think that's a breakdown of that's 18% of the 17% who've identified as LGBT. So it's not that 18% of all young people responding define their gender as other, but that 18% of the 17% who define as LGBT are defining as their gender as other. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understood it.
So it's a small percentage of a small percentage. I think it's perfectly believable that 17% of the cohort are LGBT. That isn't remotely surprising.
Yeah, Colin, I've had my hand up for a while, actually. You might have missed
Oh,
it.
sorry, I thought it was an old one.
No, this is a new one. I just wanted to mention that point as well. I think the thing is that, you know, we look at, if we're talking about the sort of demographics and percentages, we're used to sort of the Kinsey report, I think it was, which was done in the sort of 50s, 60s, which sort of talked about a sort of percentage of the population as being LGBT, well, at that time, lesbian or gay, I think, or possibly bisexual as well. I mean, this was a long time ago. Nowadays, there's a lot more conversation about this. It's much more widely. Attitudes have changed massively. People can be openly LGBT. People can, you know, be married and you know, in same-sex marriages and stuff. And so I think that the you know, and this is something that's happened through all political parties. Well, not being tall partisan here, obviously. And it's really, and that I think has so young people growing up now, there's a lot more of sort of language that's used around exploring and expressing sexuality, which wasn't maybe available when I was growing up, and so I think that there's a lot more young people able to talk about this and able to explore, and it not to be such a big issue. So I've definitely feel that certainly in my son's school and his cohort, and obviously he has got lesbian parents, so he's quite relaxed around it all. But he definitely, he sort of talks about in his class about the fact that how people feel. I mean, when I was growing up, I'd never heard of something like sort of pansexual or asexual and all these other things. So I think that young people are much more comfortable about identifying themselves or have an understanding that there's a broader spectrum of around sexuality, and I think that's what's been captured by that. I think it was 17%, which seems for us who've been, as I say, brought up with the sort of Kinsey report. It was like, it's 5%. I don't think that's real anymore. I think things have moved on, and I think that's very positive.
Well, that's a very interesting philosophical point, Sarah. We may sit and debate at some other stage. At the time of the Kinsey report, I was going to an all-boys school, so I was quite familiar with homosexuality at the time. Ben, you've got your hand up. Do you want to speak?
Yeah, well, I think there's been a number of questions about how can we get the most out of this pretty rich data source, I think. And I think just wanted to come back to something Naomi said earlier on. It's how we take this through the Developing Well partnership that Julie chairs, and how we use it to inform our priorities going forward, to help us realise our ambition, really, that children and young people have hope and aspiration for the future. And it's a rich data source. You've got a high-level report. Schools get, for those who are new to this scrutiny panel, schools get their own school-level report, which compares how they are compared to the Calderdale average, and lots of work goes on with those. And we take this report lots of other places like the Safeguarding Partnership and Community Safety Partnership, just to pick up on the issues that are particularly relevant to different bits of the system. But I think in answer to we've had a few questions about how do we make the most of it. The answer really is we take it to the Developing Well board, we look at what we might need to delve into in a bit more detail, and we work out how we get the priorities really sorted for making the most of it and actually really helping to drive improvements in the lives of children and young people, which is what it's all about, isn't it, really?
You can lead a horse to water, Ben, on what you're supplying is the water. Councillor Rivion, Helen.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very brief follow-up, really, on Sarah's point. I've been sort of familiar, I think, with health needs assessments across different authorities over a few years. I think the point you've raised around LGBTQ plus sexuality, often these services seem to me to be ahead of the curve, because my experience, they've often recorded data on this before they have been done anywhere else, and I think may well highlight changes in perception perhaps before we're aware of it with other organisations. And I think, if you said this is not an exact science, I know it's not perfect, but I would suggest it's better than us looking at it, looking our finger to the wind and thinking, does that sound probable? I think we do need to give credit to this, what we have in front of us. It's going to be the best we're going to get, although it's not perfect.
I absolutely agree. I wasn't really denying it credibility. I was questioning its, well, no, I wasn't. I think you're right. You do see trends sometimes in the younger generation before you see them in those old fogies. I think that's going to do for us tonight on this item, Ben and Naomi. Thank you very much. Again, I look forward. The report will be more interesting once we start getting out of COVID. I think it's going to be very interesting. Item 8, members, nearly over. I'm going to start on item 8. I just have my first big question, or overarching question. I hate the words overarching, actually. 2.11, a working group has been established in response to recent social work 2.18 right at the end. Work a task and finish group to review all the various strands of work. I'm assuming that's not the same group. So we've now got 2 working groups or reviews going into recruitment and retention of social workers. Are we having a crisis? Are we preempting a crisis? Are we looking backwards on a crisis? Is there any crisis?
Can I come in, Chair, please?
Please.
Yeah, there is a joint working group. It's been in place for some time, but it is doing the work that you can see there. And it's really important that we do this across children and adult services. Children and adult social workers do quite different roles now, particularly since the introduction of the Community Care Act and obviously with the child protection work, but it has very similar challenges at the moment, which is firstly, interesting people to come into social work as a career in the first place. I don't think this has been helped at all by the national profile on particularly the 2 recent child deaths and the kind of pursuit that there is of social care professionals following them home, press doorstepping them, and a real blame culture around the practice before the learning is even being looked at or known yet. So, you know, if you're a young, bright thing and you're wondering what to do with your career, you might be thinking that's a bit high risk for me for the future. So I think if we are starting to see a downturn nationally in young people wanting to come into social work as a profession. So we are looking at it across adults and children. We do think we have something unique in Calderdale about why people work for us, and we do have an extremely loyal workforce of people who've been with us a long time and stay. They stay for other reasons as well as obviously as well as the money. But Calderdale is a great place to work. The partnership work is really strong. People are kind to each other. I think our small pods really help staff feel supported and well supervised to do the work. It's a challenging job, as you know, and just to have that support when you come back to the office and have a small pod of colleagues that know your families and can support you with the work, I think is absolutely invaluable. So there is one working group. We haven't got 2 working groups, but we've got national challenge. We've got local challenge. You can see from the report, the numbers of vacancies are significant in several areas of the service, in the very front end, in the children's assessment team and in the locality team. And what we're finding is we cannot get quality staff from the agencies in the way that we would have done before. We do have a number of agency staff in, as you will see, who are covering a percentage of the vacancies. But as you've heard at previous scrutinies, the work around children in need and child protection has actually reduced over the last year. So we can actually maintain balanced caseloads because we haven't got the volume. You can see, if you look at the number of overall cases allocated in the service, it's gone down. You can see that over that period of time. But what you've also heard is that 300-400 of those young people are being supported, managed and getting a service through the Early Help Hub and the work of the police. So we have a bit of a shifting change here of more work happening at early help stage, which is good. We've got less children in need, less children on plans. We're managing to maintain our caseloads at a reasonable level, but the pressure is on us and every other local authority to make sure that you can recruit and retain your social workers. And the report does explain that we're really good in terms of student placements, of actually recruiting our students to come in as soon as they qualify in the summer. So, you know, that process has already happened, that, you know, interviews have taken place, and we know as soon as people qualify and pass their student practice, you know, they'll be straight into the service then, you know, on the beginning of their social work career pathway, hopefully with us. So yeah, a changing picture. It's not easy, but it's not just for social care. If you talk to the children's centres, they're really struggling to recruit nursery nurses. If you talk to any of the heads tonight, I'm sure they would tell you absolutely the same for leadership positions and for teachers as well. And I think the pandemic, not just for social care, but for health staff as well. I'm seeing nods from, you know, many of you work in the sector. You will know that this period of COVID has led to a real time of reflection for a lot of people about what is life about and the work-life balance, and whether people want to work in different ways or indeed pursue different careers. So it's not just social care or children's services, it is across many, many parts of the sector, you know, whichever sector or part of business you may be involved in. I think this is a national issue for us. So I'll just pause there, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions on the report as well.
Yeah, I think you made the second point I was going to make about case numbers are the same, but or within bounds. But we obviously our early help hub is keeping those numbers where they are.
Cheers.
Yeah, I thought we've been lucky or we've been clever. But I like to think the latter. Members, there are no members indicating interaction on this report, so that's good. Considering that it's now 2024, which wasn't too bad when the football kicked off 24 minutes ago, which if I hadn't had this meeting, I would be in the pub watching. But anyway, I'm not. Members, thank you for a fascinating evening. I thought that the school thing was just amazing. Probably one of the best reports we've had this year, and we've had some good ones. So you can all go off and watch Liverpool Inter Milan now while I go.
Cancer restrict.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night, members. Thanks, everyone. Take care.